something. Well, it's a beautiful Thursday afternoon, and we are all here to begin with another exciting session on connecting the dots. A very good afternoon to everyone present here today. Gender is just one aspect of an individual's identity. Yet we divide our world, our home, even our workplaces, sometimes subtly, sometimes ruthlessly along gender lines. We forget that our personalities are the driving forces behind our behaviors and attitude. PoSH not only helps to align employees and managers across departments with their legal rights under the Act, but it also helps the IC proactively take measures to cope with gender-based attitudes in the workplaces. Join us and be part of this exciting session and watch our experts share their valuable and insightful inputs on how we can mentor and coach teams across to have these role plays videos to define their own versions of a gender neutral workplace. HRAI welcomes you all to the session on connecting the dots, PoSH going beyond gender bias. To know more about HRAI and its event, I would request all our participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We'll be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed panel members for today's webinar. Mr. Prashil Parde, Chief People Officer, Tranter Software Private Limited. A seasoned HR professional with 19 plus years of fast-track multinational HR experience covering India, APAC, and US geographies. Born and brought up in Mumbai, studied at Bombay Scottish School, enriched by education from leading management institute, NMIMS, a coaching and mentoring degree from ISB under Marshall Goldsmith, and a certificate program in design thinking from MIT Solana, Boston. He has been in various HR leadership roles for companies like Tata Interactive Systems, Birla Technologies, Aon Hewitt, where his last role was a global talent program head at Chicago. Thereafter, he came to India and worked with organizations like Reliance Life Science, Times of India, led talent management at HCL Technologies at Boston, Noida, and Chennai. And currently he is a CPO with Tranter Software Private Limited. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. Details for the same have been shared in the chat window. Our next panel member, Mr. Anthony Alex, founder and CEO, Rainmaker. Mr. Anthony is a serial entrepreneur and an alumnus of NLSIU, Bangalore. Anthony started his career with ICICI Bank in 1998. The entrepreneurial bug bit him soon after, and he moved in 2001 to set up Kocher and Company Mumbai office. After 5 years of rapid growth and establishing Kocher and Company as a premier firm in Mumbai's competitive law firm landscape, in 2006, he set up his site, hired and took up the challenge of being part of the core founding team at Pangaea 3, the world's largest and most successful LPO. Anthony was instrumental in growing and scaling Pangaea 3 from 10 plus lawyers and engineers to over 1,000 professionals delivering high quality services to Fortune 500 companies and top tier law firms across the world. Throughout his career, Anthony has always been passionate about training and has conducted numerous workshops on topics ranging from preventions of sexual harassment, anti-corruption practices, corporate governance, code of conduct, etc. It is his passion for learning and training that led him to set up Rainmaker. When Anthony is not thinking about turning the world of learning on its head, he likes to read and spend time with his wife, Rivia, his daughter, Noyenika, and his lazy lab, Jordi. Adventurous sports and deep sea diving is his passion. Rishikesh, um, white water rafting, camshape, paragliding, and Daheb, deep sea diving, and are his favorite sports. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. Our next panel member, Ms. Sonika Aron, Managing Partner, Marching Sheep. Ms. Sonika is a managing partner of Marching Sheep and is among the most awarded HR advisory firm in the country today. She has recently been listed among the top 10 women entrepreneurs by Forbes India magazine, and Marching Sheep was nominated by UN Women for WP Leadership Awards for their work during the pandemic towards gender equality, emotional well-being, and empowerment. She is an experienced HR professional, passionate about diversity and inclusion, certified coach, administrator for psychometric instrument with experience in FMCG, healthcare, and telecommunication industries and across multiple geographies. She has worked in leadership roles at corporates and operational level before finding her own HR consulting firm. You can also follow her on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. Now I'll introduce our panel cum moderator for today's session, Ms. Sindhu Kalyan Sundaram, founder, Ignite Academy and Server Happiness. Sindhu brings in rich experience in organizational development and managing consulting. Her experience spans across retail banking and financial services, loyalty marketing, FMCG, IT services, agriculture, manufacturing, engineering, having worked across India and the United Kingdoms with GE, Nestle, Infosys, Cognizant, New Look Retailers, Athenian International. She's the founder of Ignite Academy and Server Happiness. She helps organizations enhance employee happiness levels as well effectiveness. She has worked with global audiences and culture. She holds a postgraduate degree in marketing and information technology from SP Jain Institute of Management and Research. You can also follow her on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. Without taking much time, I hereby hand over the platform to Ms. Sindhu. Over to you, Sindhu.
Thank you very much, Peter and HRAI. A warm welcome to the panelists and the audience as we gather once again on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. The monsoons are still in, and I think today we have a very interesting topic to be discussed about. I would rather say a deep dive, a lot of introspection, a lot of contemplation, and a lot of reflection to be done. Over the past 1.5 years, as we have embraced the virtual world, obviously there have been a lot of fluidity in our lives and a lot of dynamics have changed. Today, as we talk about a very important topic, there are numerous thoughts that are running in my mind. Number one, how have relationships changed amongst people? Number two, what kind of transactional relationships are taking place now in the virtual world? And number three, when it comes to PoSH, what are the different dimensions of human behavior and emotions that have slowly crept in? Have there been aspects that have never been thought about, but have been embraced in the last 1.5 years? Has there been some secret emotions or attitudes that have just suddenly mysteriously cropped up and we've suddenly become aware that such and such transactions can take place? And hence, how are organizations, panels, committees embarking on this journey and creating safe workplaces? So with that introduction, I would like to ask the first question to Anthony. When we talk about PoSH, one of the first aspects of organizations that comes into my mind is creating safe workplaces, creating that sense of security. So could you please tell us, in your opinion, how can organizations look at, what are all the different aspects they can look at to create safe workplaces?
Sure, Sindhu. First up, good afternoon to everybody. And thank you to HRAI and Peterson. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. Sindhu, delighted to be on this panel as well with you, Prashil, and Sonika. So great to be here. When we talk about safe workplaces, I think there are many aspects to sort of how one goes about creating the safe environment for the employees. But I think given that today's focus is a little bit on the virtual aspect, I'll sort of kick off with how the life has changed with COVID and virtual workplaces becoming very common. So because all of us are sort of working from home, or let's say remote working, it becomes critical that all forms of communication that we have at the workplace, whether it's any form of instant messaging like WhatsApp or Telegram or what have you, or any email communication or any other formal modes of communication, virtual meeting rooms, Zoom and the like, all of these now have virtually become the workplace, right? This is where we interact and all the work gets done. The other aspect that we need to bear in mind is that the work-life balance is shifting a little bit, because the boundaries are getting more blurred, increasingly blurred, because people are working from home and not necessarily from the offices. So organizations have to really focus on sensitizing their workforce on the fact that in a virtual world, the entire definition of a workplace has changed. A lot of people are under the misconception that if you're hiding behind a digital barrier, if you're behind, let's say, a laptop or a phone because you're WhatsApping or emailing, then that anything that you do doesn't necessarily constitute sexual harassment at the workplace. That's far from the truth. And what we need to create safe workplaces really create awareness around the fact that all of these constitute the workplace, and all of all of the inappropriate acts that happen on one of these mediums also amounts to sexual harassment at the workplace. And this needs to be constantly reinforced. Training, day in, day out, it needs to be made part of the organization's culture. And one very important aspect is that it must flow top down. There has to be the senior management buy-in at the CXO level in every organization, where they all say that they reinforce the message that training, compliance, all of these things are very important. Plus the fact that culture, zero tolerance culture for any form of inappropriate behavior. So these are just, I mean, there's a lot more to kind of touch upon, but just if I were to get started, I would say that these are the few very important things that every organization needs to focus on from a safe workplaces perspective.
So Alex, this is Prashil. Out of in the past 1 year, what are the 5 highlights that you have, concerns that you have received from organizations while you are dealing with them? Like,
yeah, go ahead, Prashil.
Example, winking at the computer screen, is it considered as harassment or speaking?
So Prashil, those are all will depend on the facts and circumstances of a particular case. I'll take winking, for example, right? Let's say a complaint has gone to the internal committee, and the complainant has told the committee that I'm very uncomfortable because this colleague keeps winking at me during Zoom calls. During the course of the investigation, the IC comes to the conclusion that IC finds out that the respondent has a problem of dry eyes, and therefore constant staring at the screen can lead to a movement that could potentially be seen as winking. But actually, that is the way that person behaves with all the other colleagues, not just that individual, but everybody else, whether it's men or women. If that colleague is exposed to the screen for too long, then that problem kicks in. That could be one explanation. The other is that it could be a different conclusion if the IC realizes that, or comes to the conclusion that this winking has happened only with this one colleague, or maybe with another female colleague, but nobody else. In which case, the IC will draw a different conclusion. So, Prashil, to answer your question, I would say that almost everything will depend on the facts and circumstances of a particular case. What happened? Who are the parties involved? And only post, a thorough investigation by the internal committee can can we actually draw a conclusion from from what happened in a particular instance?
Alex, why
I
do you
was
think
sorry for interrupting, Prashil.
Alex, why do you say a male member will only wink? Yeah, it can be other way around also.
Absolutely, no, it's a very good point, Prashil. The winking can happen by a female colleague as well, and the same facts that I narrated would apply in that instance as well. Of course, the internal committee may not necessarily hear the matter. It may have to go to another committee if the respondent is male. But pretty much everything that I said applies to both genders.
Anthony, the fact that you spoke about the virtual world blurring and the fact that Prashil brought out this interesting dimension of why can't it just be a gentleman, it can be a lady as well. Yes. I think these lay out the context as to what actually constitutes sexual harassment, and is it just one-sided? Are there different dimensions to this picture? So I think you set a great start about it being a top-down approach, and people have to educate themselves and become more vigilant in the virtual world. That leads me to an interesting question, especially because we were talking about why can't it be women, it can be men as well. Sonika, do you think gender equality is important in this case? And can it actually reduce or increase gender bias, especially in terms of sexual harassment cases that you might have come across? You're on mute, Sonika.
So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Sindhu, and thank you, HRAI. So let me take it from, let me take a step back over here, okay? So first of all, I think, what does PoSH really stand for, right? PoSH stands for creating safe workplaces for every employee, where an employee can come in and work with dignity, where an employee can work and feel safe, right? Whether it is the virtual world or the physical world. That's what it says, right? Prevention, protection, redressal. So even before protection and redressal comes prevention. And for prevention comes awareness. Now with awareness, if we can drive awareness about what are appropriate and inappropriate behaviors, and that cuts across genders. It does not have to be for men only. Unfortunately, the way the communication goes out, it is seen that the act is pro-women, right? However, it is not the intent. The intent is that both the genders can coexist if we create a safe and work environment where both the genders are respected, where the inappropriate behaviors can be weeded out. So PoSH, to my mind, is the first step and a very necessary step for gender inclusion. I will not say equality, because equality then has a lot of other connotations. We should talk about equity, enablement, empowerment. So I would say gender inclusion. So when it comes to, and now today we are talking about fluidity of genders. Now again, the act today does not include the other genders, but the act is the base, right? What stops an organization from making a PoSH policy which is gender inclusive? If we truly want to make an inclusive work environment, we can take the postulates of the act, see what the act says, and make a PoSH policy which is gender inclusive, create a safe working environment for everyone, have the complaints committee address all the sexual harassment cases which come. Anthony spoke about safety. I have a different angle on safety. Safety is not just about what is happening in the workplace. What about a sense of security? Now, after the first wave, and also not so much after the second wave, but after the first wave, there was a huge amount of insecurity regarding jobs. who is going to be laid off, who is not going to be laid off. In such a scenario, have we been able to drive a sense of security amongst women, saying that you are free to speak up, even if you get harassed on a virtual platform? There is zero tolerance, even in a virtual setup, and you can speak up. That to me is creating a sense of security. Now, Prashil said, what are the kind of issues that have come to you? I'll tell you the kind of issues that have come. Nobody is going to office. Why do we need to do PoSH training? Number one. Number two, the act is silent on the frequency of training. We did training 2 years back. What is the right frequency? If we do training too often, would we increase the number of cases that are coming up? Number three, how do we do an investigation in a virtual setup? Even if a complaint comes in, how do we do a investigation in a virtual setup? These are some of the kind of issues which have come in the last 1 year. So today, our approach to PoSH implementation is not just about implementation of the act, which will be a tick mark. It has to be in spirit. It has to be prevention and protection. Redressal will happen after the act has happened. That's it.
So
I'd just like to
that's,
add, Sindhu, one point to what Sonika said. All fantastic points, and the aspect of a gender inclusive policy. I think most organizations want to get to that place, but aren't quite sure how to do it. For example, I know a lot of organizations that make just the internal committee the focal point of all sexual harassment complaints, and unfortunately, doing so would be in violation of the PoSH Act, which actually stipulates that the IC is only for hearing complaints by women. Now, that is the legal framework. So all of us have to work within that legal framework. But as Sonika rightly pointed out, the Act can be the, sort of like a foundation level. It's the bare minimum that every organization needs to do. Then you can add layers on top of that to make it gender inclusive. You can have another committee similar to the IC that has similar powers as that of the IC. Of course, it can never have the statutory powers that the IC has, but the organization can give it maximum powers in order to ensure that any other complaint or any complaint from any other genders that come are also handled in the same fashion and with the same urgency and with the same level of competence that the internal committee has. And that's the way to create a sort of mechanism that can be truly fair and gender inclusive.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sonika. Sonika, from what you said, I think there's whole load of thinking that needs to be done. Number one, like you said, so possibly the entire dimension of PoSH can be customized according to the environment, the domain, the demographics of the company, the nature of the organization. And number two, maybe a lot of thought needs to go in, because considering that we're now going to be talking across screens, then possibly it's very important to take into account a lot of things we may have never thought about before, which means a lot of foresight is needed along with the experience that we've had over the last 1.5 years. And thirdly, most importantly, like you said, redressal can come later, but how do I even prevent something from happening? What is the frequency of training? Fantastic points. I think we should be able to get some clarity on these over the next few minutes. But what you said leads me to this question to Prashil, when both Anthony and Sonika are talking about the PoSH training or the entire mindset to be a top-down approach. What, according to you, could be construed as inappropriate behavior? You just gave an example of winking, but what else can be construed as inappropriate behavior in a video call setup professionally?
So there are various experiences one has had, but let me put it in a very simple format. There are two parties involved into this whole transaction. One, it's you who's undergoing, for example, and there's somebody who's executing. executing that act. Step one, the way I look at it, is, and I'm probably coming through in terms of mentoring and coaching and giving this kind of a training to people. You should be very clear what you're experiencing. There should be a record of this at some point of time. Not this is what he said, and I would reply back to 10 different people what they think. In this transaction, if you are undergoing, record the session. And there should be people, don't depend upon what 5 different people are saying, but the people who are the IC or your manager or his manager or a separate team that is investigating it, they should have a certain recorded mechanism of proof to go through it. That is the first part. Second part is you should have your own self-reliance and self-respect in terms of what are the what is the act that you are undergoing. There are many a times one feels that, oh, he did this to me or he did that to me, and I'm very clear about it. Probably that might not be the case. Be sane, honestly. He might be having dry eyes, that's the reason why he winked, or there would be a challenge that he was going through at home, and that's the reason why he must have just raised his voice and lost control, which he doesn't do. That is not his normal self. Or by mistake, the video was on and he forgot to wear a shirt, but came in how to crassly put it, a banyan, and sat in front of the video. Don't add more work to others. Okay, one part is respect that you have for yourself, but a sense of balance that you should have in terms of whether it is a one-off act or whether it is a repetitive act, and what action that I have taken in the first place to give feedback, and have you addressed the issue yourself. Don't run to IC or any other committee because this has happened and this is the recording. Be sane, be honest. You're not, there is this, if it is not a repetitive action, give an address, give a feedback, and let the time pass to review it. Second, if you are a person who is doing it, and if you have got a feedback from a colleague of yours that these 5 actions that you do are really bothering me, work on it. The first response generally people have is go ahead and either argue on that event or make a judgment about it. It's much better to keep your mouth shut to start with. Count from 1 to 100 to experiencing it, and then realizing it's a professional environment and a professional colleague, whether it's a younger colleague or a senior colleague or my colleague in my similar way. He is observed something, act on it, address. The person is, it takes a lot of guts for somebody to even address this issue in terms of way you dress, the way you talk, the way you shout on the calls, the way you whilst conversing, this is what happens, or you are winking, or different ways and means of feedback that comes. Assimilate it, accept it, work on it, and go back to the person and say that thank you for your feedback. I have worked on it. This is 10 days time, and I think so I'm making the difference. I think so that's the place where sanity, maturity, and integrity comes out. And the only 3 aspects that you need to execute out to people when you're getting a feedback is your sanity, maturity, and integrity. And the matter ends there. And once you have done that and done a feedback, if the person who has given you a feedback has recorded the session, you also record the session, because the act in the virtual world shows that you are addressing it by a form of some actions that you're doing, and let the sheep come home. Work on building up the relationship rather than in a matured manner, rather than pushing it to the corner where it just might blow up. Probably out of 80% of the cases are purely the way you deal with feedback and the way you give feedback. and how it's more emotional rather than it's less of maturity that comes in, less of integrity that comes in. So hold your horses, give feedback in a way that is accepted nicely, and take feedback in a matured way that you can address it. And if you have worked on it, go and create a recorded input saying that yes, I have done this and this is where I have reached. Thank you for your inputs. Matter 80% of the cases lie low there. There are really serious cases, then those are the cases where needs to be addressed, and have a personal self-respect that you are not going to take this. Don't it's not it's less of a posh act but more of a self-respect, and that's what you should focus on. And for my learned colleagues, they might have a different view, but the way I have handled these situations, 80 to 85% of the cases get dissolved when maturity starts playing football there. That's
Right.
the way I would say.
Thank you, Prashil, especially when you spoke about sanity, maturity, and integrity. One point that caught my attention was many times it's more emotional, which you said, which leads me to this question. Number one, when we talk about sexual harassment, you can look at it at a very surface level and observe why do such instances occur. But when you go down to a deeper level, one discovers that there are intentions, there are objectives, or probably it's a whole different ball game than what actually meets the eye. More than just a transactional act, many times you get to see that there's something else behind it, where one turns out to be powerless, one turns out to execute that sense of power, which means there's a lot going on in the mind that needs to be addressed. So, Anthony, my question for you is, when things are driven from a power perspective, how do you emotionally address this issue with organizations? And can organizations actually emotionally connect with employees by addressing this issue?
Sure. So, Sindhu, you mean when instances happen due to from the position of power, in the matrix of power, right? Powerful people doing it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, really speaking, that is closely linked to what you've just asked in terms of the emotional connect with the people, right? It's all boils down to the culture of the organization and how the senior people in the organization are sort of trained and sensitized on what kind of behaviors are appropriate. Also, important is what kind of checks and balances does the organization have in place to ensure that there isn't any abuse of power. For example, just this is one of the thoughts that just came to mind. Does an organization have a policy to moderate appraisals or moderation policy for appraisals to ensure that one individual does not have all of the power or authority in their hands to decide to make or break their subordinates or team members' fate, right? So that could be one way organizations can look at ensuring that there is a sort of a more democratic setup, if you will. But the emotional connect point is an interesting one, and I think that's where again I always come back to the point that it must flow from the top. There has to be a top-down approach where the senior management, the CXOs, are very clear that the kind of organization they're building is a zero tolerance, for sexual harassment at the workplace kind of organization. They have got to repeatedly make that point clear. And remember, under the PoSH Act, the management actually has a lot of powers. How? They are the ones who appoint the internal committee members. An organization that wants to set the right tone and set the right culture will appoint people with integrity, people with honesty, people with sincerity, and people who are committed to eradicating sexual harassment at their workplace, right? You appoint the right people on your internal committee, you are going to find the results flowing in, because that committee automatically has credibility. People look up to those people and say, yes, I know that if I go to this committee with a complaint, I know that I can trust them to do the right thing. On the converse, or conversely, if you appoint people who are known to be close to the management or cronies or people without the kind of credibility that is required, that heft that is needed for running the internal committee, then you're going to find that your people do not have the faith in that committee, and by default you'll end up in a situation where there is no emotional connect between the people and the organization. They don't have faith in the organization to do the right thing. Other things that are also important to build the connect is to ensure that the word is spread far and wide within the organization about it being a zero tolerance atmosphere for SH. Word is spread far and wide about who are the members of the IC. How do you contact them if you have a problem of sexual harassment at the workplace? And of course, training in a storytelling format where you bring out problems faced by different people, the trauma they have had to undergo. All of those things really make it relatable to the people who are being trained. Then they realize that it is important that we all understand what sexual harassment at the workplace is and why it's important and why one shouldn't indulge in it. One last point, and just as a sort of a reaction to what Prashil said previously, my view is that we should empower people to approach the IC. It's a slight deviation from what you had suggested, Prashil, but in our experience, people who are sexually harassed are already thinking 100 or 1,000 times about, should I actually talk about it to my manager? Should I talk about it to my, should I even dare go to the IC? If the ideal situation would be, you don't necessarily need to file a written complaint as the law mandates, but you should feel comfortable going up to a member of the IC or a presiding officer or any of the other members to say, hey, this was a situation that I was in, and these are all the facts, and I'm thinking of filing a complaint. Please advise. At a minimum, at least an IC is the organization or the body that is trained to handle cases of sexual harassment. Nobody else. Everybody else has a strong understanding of possibly what it means. But if the organization has played its cards well and is following the law, then the IC is the body that is fully trained. It also has an external member with expertise in that area. They are the people who you should be sending people to and say, even if you don't want to file a complaint, just go talk to them. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Let them decide what is the appropriate way forward. Just a slight variation from what you said, Prashil. Otherwise, sort of on board with what you stated. So those are my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Anthony.
May I, add?
I'll just complete my thought, Sonika. I agree, Anthony. And there are wonderful kinds of people that make this world. And it's the decision one takes, and there are experiences one needs to follow. So yes, the person does think 100 times. There are wonderful puppeteers who do not think it wonderful times. Let me go and take a dip at it and see whether it works so that I can teach a lesson. So there are, yes, the process should be well armed and ironed, but the person who is putting forth the complaint and the person who's undergoing a complaint, there is a huge impact on credibility and a huge impact on virtual, how should I say, understanding about the careers are made and lost based upon a single complaint. And that's the place where the confirmation needs to be done. A young kid who does not probably might have not understood the way the actions meant, goes and tries to teach a lesson to his boss, to her boss, and that's the way it should be done. I mean, the people who really face a lot of questions throughout their life, people who are good and not so good, but the choice is you need to be clear, sure. Integrity, maturity is what really plays a big part rather than spoiling somebody's career over the pipeline. Sorry, Sonika, but this is my 2-bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So the current virtual scenario has exposed a lot of vulnerability, particularly amongst women who are staying away from family, maybe staying in PG, maybe being single. Now, this vulnerability, we also have to understand. You spoke about something much deeper. Now, power is not just about hierarchical power, but power is also about unconscious biases. The biases that we hold against people, or the societal biases that we might be having about a woman being powerless, about a woman not having a support system, about a woman not being able to speak up. Now, in such situations, when an act is perpetrated, and then a woman might or might not feel empowered. Now, that depends on the n number of things that Anthony spoke about. Has the organization created a culture where she feels that she will be heard? If she will get a fair hearing, if the IC will take the required amount of time, and whether the person will be brought to justice or not. Now, I know for a fact in one of the most credible organizations, the IC took 1 year, more than a year, to solve the case. And even then, the perpetrator was not brought to justice. And eventually, the person who had raised the complaint decided to move on because she had to face the respondent every day. Now, there has to be consistency between the spoken word by the organization, saying that we are a zero tolerance company, having an IC, and then taking action. The two have to be in sync. You can't say we are a zero tolerance company, have an IC, and then not give the IC time or the teeth to take fair calls. Because then you lose all credibility.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunately, that is where the gap lies. So, in terms of compliance, yes, we have all the ticks. We have an IC in every branch. We have trainings happening once a year. We have online modules. We have everything. But women do not feel safe to speak up. Women will not walk up to an IC member because they know that the entire procedure will take months and the person will still not get punished. So might as well not speak up, quit their job and go somewhere else. So you are right, Sindhu. The emotional piece is much deeper than the compliance and the tick box piece.
Thank you, Sonika. What you and what the word trust from Anthony's response actually stood out. And I was looking at the discussions in the chat box where we are discussing about, I have confidence on some person, but then that person just breaks my trust. It can actually shatter me, in which case I might not even have evidence, correct? And what Sonika speaks about is, have we created an environment where I can actually go up and feel that sense of security? Can I actually go and speak about what is happening to me? Have organizations created that environment? So, I mean, when we talk about emotions, we talk about trust, we talk about sense of security, and then we talk about empowerment. And all these are really heavy words and extremely pertinent towards creating an organization culture where people feel safe to not only work, but safe to voice out. So again, question for you, Sonika, is then what sort of trainings do people have to go through? So when you talk about PoSH, you have PoSH, which is a huge umbrella, but looking at everything that we've discussed so far, people have to be enlightened and trained on multiple perspectives, like don't break somebody's trust, be empowered, create a secure environment. And like Prashil said, understand what can be misconstrued.
Yes.
So who is going to deliver these trainings in organizations, and what is going to be the scope of these trainings?
So I believe it is not just the act, right? It is the spirit of the act. So there is a legal side to it, and then there is the human side to it. I need to make it relatable. So if I'm talking to the workmen in a factory, they need to understand that when they are working with women on the shop floor, what does it mean to create a safe environment where they can work without any issues of sexual harassment? How can biases creep in? You know, walking in a line towards the canteen, if there is a push, that is not sexual harassment. But if on the shop floor, if a woman is uncomfortable about abusive language and she has told you that repeatedly, and you still persist in using abusive language, then yes, she would be within her rights to raise a complaint. So you need to desist. So these are the kind of relatable examples that you need to tell them. And there needs to be that customization. There needs to be that kind of relatability. And it does not have to be one-sided. I mean, the issue of malicious complaints or misunderstandings that Prasheel is calling out, that needs to be called out, because PoSH cannot become an invisible divide between men and women, which it did. There was a time when men said, I don't want to hire women because I can't give feedback behind closed doors. It was ridiculous, right? So it has to be, I mean, even women need to realize what is sexual harassment, where to draw a line. So it has to be a conversation. They have to understand the human side of it. They have to be mature about it. They have to understand the underlying biases, the objectification. They have to understand what is quid pro quo. Quid pro quo can also happen from a woman. They have to understand what is hostile work environment. They have to understand the different scenarios. Just understanding the act is not good enough. Understanding the different case laws, what are the different judgments saying? And that is why do we need to keep on doing these refreshers? Because there are new judgments coming every now and then.
Right.
Right. So for me, if you really, really want to go deep in this and you want to implement, every organization is different, demographics is different, industry is different, the age demographic is different. Today, you know, a BPO industry will have zillennials and young millennials. They think very differently. Everybody is bro, everybody is hugging. For them, it would not be, half the things would not be sexual harassment. So you will have to customize. That's my take.
And just to add to what Sonika said, I think ultimately it goes back to intent. Impact matters, not intent. And I think whether you're talking about the baby boomers or Gen X or Gen Z, the way they behave with each other is obviously going to be different across the generations. But if you stick to, what really you should be looking at when a case of sexual harassment comes to you, what is the impact that it has had on the aggrieved person? I think you'll have your answer. Whether if there is whether there's a culture of hugging or what have you, you'll always have the answer if you look into what exactly was the act and what was the impact on the aggrieved person.
Right. So looking at the scope, which tends to be growing, like you said, every other day you have a new judgment coming in, which means it's not only the scope which is growing, the continuous learning and education of this particular act and the scenarios around it possibly are expanding, which means there needs to be a constant case of learning right? So what I understand from what you say is it's not enough if I go just do one set of training and come back and say we are PoSH trained and that's it. It has to be an ongoing process. And as and when we onboard new people, we expand our businesses, we get in new clients, we merge into different domains, everything changes. And which means this is actually an ongoing process. But what could possibly lay roots could be the organizational values that are driven right into the DNA of every employee. So Prashil, question for you is, what do you think should be the top 3 values that can be ingrained into every employee to reduce the instances of sexual harassment?
I mean, top three values in concerned with the sexual harassment scenario primarily are what I had earlier said. This maturity, integrity are extremely important. Most of the organizations have a wonderful vision, mission, value system that's set through where people go through it. But when the tire hits the road under pressure, when the tire hits the road under delivery mechanisms, that's the time all the values of the organization really come through a question mark. But the real fact is, when you're facing that, what are the values you have within yourself when you're facing them? What are the 3? I mean, I went through, in my previous avatars, when I worked through different organizations, we had one of the most beautiful values all set through. People even observed that, concurred with it. We were happy doing that. But there are times when we were faced with a scenario, as what Anthony and Sonika said, the kind of mental and emotional turmoil the person goes through, does not know how to do it. Honestly speaking, whoever is undergoing, whether it's a male or a female, when they're undergoing the sexual harassment challenge, believe you me, there's so much of research that they do. There are times I feel I don't know the PoSH law as much as each one of them knows. But the idea is not the law, the idea is how they decipher it. And deciphering it is for my own benefit, that I am the person facing the biggest problem in my life. And the only way you can handhold them, and I'm concurring with Anthony and Sonika, that there are a lot of things one needs to go through it, but I've experienced them both senior level and junior level of people, and I've handheld them. Integrity, honesty, and maturity are the only 3 cards that play when the person is experiencing that. I mean, are you matured enough to stand in front of the perpetrator, as what you said right now, and tell him, hey, Johnny, you must be a fantastic guy, but these are the 4 things that you do are really creating a problem. In a similar way, the guy who's actually taking the feedback, rather being emotional and how should I say, his hubris does not play into the picture, but come back and say, no matter what you're saying, I think so, I'm matured enough to understand what you're saying. You know what most of the time the people do? They run to the HR. Forget the IC, forget the manager, forget anybody else. They run to the HR to sanitize their thoughts. And the biggest role and the challenge, the IC can be well experienced and they have a lot of teeth in them. But are the people who are listening through this scenario are able to decipher and tell them, have you done A, B, C, D things? Apart from the PoSH laws, have you done it yourself as a human being first? Have you dealt with these things? Are you sure? Most of the time, people don't have proofs. But believe you me, 3 weeks down the line, they have a proof because they are undergoing that situation again. And that's the place where role of advisors that play, saying that how are you maturing through this? I mean, the people within the organization have a challenge how to handhold them and make them realize whether this makes sense. And telling the people who are experiencing it, I mean, till the time he's not the investigation is not through, he's not a perpetrator. Okay, so let's drop that part. There is a sense of understanding of how an action is read by a person, by an employee. What have you done in order to explain your point of view? And what have you done to listen to the point of view? Is there a maturity in the science of conversation that you have been able to deal with? I'm not saying that these perpetrators do not exist. And I'm not saying the victims do not exist at different scenarios. I'm only saying don't self-proclaim yourself, either proclaim yourself to the victim or proclaim the other a perpetrator, because the responsibility of your career and his career really has a value to it. Don't spoil people's careers by gossip. But that's one thing PoSH does not say anything about. And that's one thing that really spoils people's careers to a level where he cannot get placed or cannot get a position within the organization and outside one. So you have a responsibility towards yourself and to the other person. Start with a conversation and build on it and get proofs. And once it's not working, go down to a place where it really goes. So these are few of the characteristics that I would rather say, or if you ask me, how should the culture grow? These are few places where these three basic traits really make a lot of difference when you're addressing a scenario like this. Now, Anthony and Sonika, I'm not saying that the law doesn't have its teeth, or the IC does not have its teeth, or they should not be trained. Yes, they should be. But the start at the place where it really makes a difference. It's the person who's experiencing it and who's being forced to experience it. I'm going down to that level first, where these three characteristics should exist in that part of the world. And most of the things are then sorted out. I mean, if you have proof along with it, and if you're going through it, and if you have proof to give to the IC or to any other committee, yes, go through it and solve it. But be confirmed with the fact that you have taken those initial steps in order to resolve it. And then build on it and fight till the end. And that's the time when people like the HR are there with you, holding your hand, and fight till the end. Don't worry about what happens later on. Solve one problem at a time. Don't solve the world. Get this problem, address it, and then move on. That's what my two-bit. I do not think so I've answered your question fully, Sindhu. I'm not answered the question on the organization's perspective. I'm answered the question at the person's perspective, because that is a traumatic time when the person is undergoing it, and a traumatic time when the person comes to know if it didn't mean anything like that. It is a traumatic time for him when he's getting a feedback. And that is, nobody can explain that. No law, no PoSH, no conversation can explain that. The fear the person goes through is probably more dangerous than his wife telling him you're not eating your lunch. So I guess that's the nearest I can speak about.
Thank you, Prashil. That's where I guess being extremely conscious and aware of various dimensions of what can be construed is important. And that's where Sonika and Anthony also come in to say why it's important to keep people aware, why continuous training is important. And number three, what sort of organization are we creating? What sort of culture are we creating? When you conceptualize, I hire in 100 people, apart from them following the vision and values put up on the plaque in the boardroom, what else do I want them to exhibit? Thank you. It's been a fantastic discussion.
Organizations exist to make profit and serve the customers. As simple as that. Everything else is, by the way, comes in the picture.
Incidental.
Sanity work.
Yes, but with the people. So exactly, I mean, what you said, Prashil, with people. So how do we reach out to their more humane side and create safer organizations? So that's what we're looking at. I think all the three of you have sown a lot of seeds for thought, because this can be an ongoing discussion considering the ever expanding dimensions of the human mind, how we discover new avenues to interact with people, to continue our ongoing daily routine, and how a lot of different medium can be used or misused. And like Sonika said, how the act can always be ever expanding, and how we need to take into account things that we've never thought about. So just to do a quick summary, yes, it has to be a top-down approach, which Anthony said has to come from the top. Trust plays a very integral role. Prashil, you gave us examples about what could be misconstrued as being inappropriate and how it's important to think before you act. And Sonika, how prevention comes before redressal. Redressal comes later, but how can we prevent and create a safer environment? Lot of thoughts. We have the HR fraternity here who can go back to their respective organizations, discuss, contemplate, reflect on everything that's been discussed this afternoon and see if they can customize and implement this act in your organization. Thank you very much, Anthony, Prashil, and Sonika. I'll hand it over to Peter now because I think he wants to run a quick poll.
Yes. So before we take up live questions from our participants, we'll be running a poll to capture the feedback of our participants. So we'd request all our participants to kindly share your feedback on our today's session. So Sindhu, do we have any questions out there that you would be taking up? Because we are also running out of time. So Sindhu, would you be taking any questions that have come up from the participants?
Yes, there is one question. Interesting question from Poonam, where she asked, while recruitment, how can we be careful and avoid pretentious people? Because even after scrutiny and reference check, it's difficult to understand the integrity and value system of employees. I'll leave it to any of the panelists to address this.
So let me answer that. There is no way we can do it apart from doing a background check and a metal test to go through it. But as the person rises up in the cadre, most of the organizations do follow a lot of psychometric analysis, which do speak about, I mean, whether it's Hogan or whether it's some other test that comes through. But these are all predictive. It's not, it will not, you can't get into somebody's head and say, this is how he is. And eventually it becomes an individual responsibility to evaluate it. But if you're looking at a senior level position, most of the time, some of the organizations that I've played roles with, we have gone ahead and done forecastive psychometric testing. We initially started with Hogan and then evolved to it at a later date, different levels of it. But if anybody wants some more inputs about it, you can always reach out to me and I can share some wonderful experiences through that.
I'd agree with Prashil. I think there's no way to accurately figure out before you hire a person how they are going to behave at the workplace. Some of these tests can help you get a better understanding, but a lot of times the way people behave at a workplace, it also depends on the kind of people they are with, and it's human beings we're talking about and how they react in a particular environment, right? So there's really no effective way, but like Prashil said, I think, in my view, background checks are an effective way to get a sense of what a person may have behaved or what their behavior was like at a previous workplace. Some very discrete inquiries, especially if you are recruiting at a senior level, because that's where the stakes get higher, right? That's where a person has to behave appropriately since they are in a position of power. So that's where, background checks, discrete inquiries, speaking to past colleagues, engaging the right organization to do your checks for you. All of these can really make a big difference when you're hiring somebody at the workplace.
Great. Thank you very much, Anthony and Prashil. I think we're done with the questions, Peter. I'm looking at
Yes,
in interest of
yes.
time. So thank you very much. Like I said, it's been a fantastic discussion. We have lots to take back, and we hope that we're able to go back and create safer, most importantly, create that sense of security amongst the people who work in organizations, so that they love coming back to work, and then they start believing this is my company, this is my organization, and these are my people. Thank you very much. Over to you, Peter.
Enlightening conversation. Thank you, Sindhu, for taking us through this insightful discussion. Thank you, Mr. Prashil, Mr. Anthony, and Ms. Sonika for your brilliant responses. To all those who wish to learn and grow, you can access the recordings of our today's session on our YouTube link shared in the chat window. Before we conclude with our today's session, we would also want to thank all the association members, Geisha, NASCOM COE, GlipTalk, Talgro, TLE, WICCI, LinkedIn Local, Ahmedabad, and India for supporting HRAI events. To know more about these associations, request you to kindly visit the link provided in the chat window. Do join us for our next event on connecting the dots on the topic, talent development, online, virtual, personalized, on the 9th of September, 2021 at 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Request you all to kindly register for this event at the link mentioned in the chat window. See you soon. Stay safe. Take care. Bye for now. Keep learning. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Shyam. We can hereby conclude with today's session.
Yeah, we can.